Hey guys, in this video we're going to cover the G0602 CNC conversion Z-axis bearing blocks, and this kind of feels like half of a video because I'm missing some footage and I didn't quite cover all of the angles I wanted to. There's not really a lot of other content that fits well into this video, so we're just going to go over the bearing blocks for now, and then I'll make it up to you by rolling out another video here in a couple of days. So this is the bearing block for the floating side of the lead screw, and this came from Linear Motion Bearing 2008's eBay store, which I discussed I think in video 2, which was the spreadsheet video. I didn't want to make my own bearing blocks, and I figured for the little bit extra money it's just easier to buy them with the lead screws, and it actually worked out really well. So you can see here the first thing I did was set the bearing block all the way to the left up against the lead screw drive shaft, and then all the way up under the way. And then I used a 3/16" transfer punch and punched a hole. Actually, it might have been a 1/4" transfer punch. And then I made this drill bushing, and I drilled it number 7 because that's what I'll be using for my 1/4-20 taps. I don't have a number 7 transfer punch, I just have a 3/16, so I used that to locate the drill bushing, and then just using a number 7 drill bit, I drill through the casting. One thing I would say about the location of this bearing block, I think mounting it all the way to the left so it's actually touching that driving shaft is fine, because I'm going to unhook the gear train anyway, so that shaft is never going to spin again. One thing I would say is that mounting the bearing block all the way to so it's touching the underside of the way, I don't quite like that. And if I were doing this again, I would include, or when I set the bearing block on there to hit it with the transfer punch, I would actually shim it down maybe a 32nd of an inch. Just get a piece of thin sheet metal or some plate or whatever you have. I mean, you could shim it down 1/8 of an inch, but just shim it down a little bit so there's a gap between the top of the bearing block and the bottom of the way. And that will allow you to have less of a chance for binding when you're installing your bolts. And in my case, I did have a tiny amount of binding. It wasn't a big deal. Then in this drill bushing, I also drilled a 1/4" hole, which was clearance for my 1/4-20 tap, and then go ahead and tap the hole. So the other thing I want to mention about my placement of the bearing blocks is, of course, if you shim down this one, you'll also have to shim down the other one. But I wanted to install both of my bearing blocks with just one bolt each, then install the lead screw, or the ball screw, to make sure that everything was square and parallel and there were no problems, no binding. And then I used the bearing blocks as for transfer punches and drill guides to get the other bolt holes located. On this front bearing block, you're going to have a problem because the casting falls away from the bearing block, so you're going to need to create a shim, and I just made mine out of mild steel. The width and the height don't matter. I just made it the same width of the bearing block, and then I think it was 1 inch tall, and it ended up being exactly 200 thousandths thick. And you can measure this yourself by just installing the bearing block and then using your digital caliper or whatever to figure out how thick that needs to be. You could use shim packs, or if you have feeler gauges, that would work. And then when it goes to installing, just get it kind of tight, slide it in there, snug it up. And that held perfectly well for transfer punching and drilling and tapping the second hole. I will also say the transfer punches I use is the set from Harbor Freight, and I've been really happy with them. I've used them on various materials and haven't dulled any of them, and yeah, they seem to be pretty accurate. Okay, so here's a final shot of the bearing block totally mounted. And now we'll move over and do the driven bearing block. Now, we're going to speed this whole thing up because you already know the process. One thing I want to mention is I broke a drill bit and 2 bolts on this side of the casting. And I think the reason for that is I believe these castings are poorly made. That may surprise you. And I think there's pockets or inclusions in the iron. And so once when drilling, I broke a drill bit. Luckily, I never broke any taps, and I was able to get the broken drill bit out. But as what would happen was I didn't do a great job of blowing out the hole after drilling and tapping it. And then I would install a bolt, and it would go in just fine. But then when I would go to back it out, something would jam. And I think maybe dust or something was up in some kind of pocket or inclusion, and it would fall out and bind the bolt. And so then I would have to re-drill them, and it was a total nightmare. So here on this side, you can see I've just got one bolt mounted, mounting it again. This one, the right edge is flush with the end of the casting, and we'll go over that a little bit more when we discuss the Z-axis stepper mount. Basically, the idea is that if I ever wanted to run a pulley system, I would. I didn't have a shot of me installing the entire lead screw, just the left side, but here you can see what I'm talking about. Now there's this little boss sticking out of the bearing block. It's not the front of that boss that's flush with the casting, it's the bearing block itself. You can see that boss can be unbolted. So just flush with the end, and then that left about 1.5 inches of the ball screw's threaded end to stick out. So that way, if I ever wanted to install a stepper motor, like let's say on the back side of the casting, I could do that, and I could run a pulley and drive it that way. And I would only do that if I needed like some kind of gear reduction. Anyway, that's it for this video, pretty short. Go ahead and scroll down, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't. If you have questions or comments, please post them below. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible, and I'll see you in the next video.